Welcome to Genuine Humans, exploring the stories behind the great marketing leaders of our time and hearing how their journeys have influenced the brands they've built. Brought to you by The Social Element, here are our hosts, Tamara Littleton, CEO and founder, and Wendy Christie, Chief People Officer.
Welcome back to Genuine Humans podcast. And again, as always, Wendy Christie is my fabulous co-host. Hello, Wendy. How are you doing?
Hello, good, thank you. Yes, it's been blowing a hoolie out here, but hopefully things will settle soon. How are you?
Yeah, of course, because up in Scotland, well, I know we were all on alert for storms, but it was pretty bad for you, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was a wild night, and not in a good way.
Okay, but you're safe.
Absolutely fine.
And hopefully not suffering from any broken windows or anything. But we have today Megan Harrison, the VP of Global Marketing at Pierre, which is part of Grupo Bimbo. And Megan, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
And we're going to hear a bit more about what you've been up to. But also, I know that you've had an amazing career up to date and you've led development of really iconic household brands such as like Huggies, Durex, Warburtons and Imperial Leather, just to name a few. So I want to give you the opportunity to sort of give us a little breakdown of how you've got to where you are now and also what you're doing at Pierre.
Yes, well, good morning, and thank you so much for having me today. I'm really looking forward to chatting to you both around all of these topics that we share, actually, overall, some key things. So I guess for me, I think my career always started and has continued, thankfully, and been structured really around what I enjoy. And I'm still to this day can say I'm so lucky to enjoy working and enjoy my career. And I think that's always been quite a big deal that I did with myself from the beginning. So I think right from the beginning, without knowing that, I really sort of followed my interests. And interestingly, right at the beginning, they did fall into two quite different, distinct camps. I had a real passion for textiles and yet also real curiosity and passion for science and probably some of the unknown of that, I think. And so I really shaped kind of my GCSE selections, then my A-level selections around those two things. But eventually, I ended up then doing a science degree. And that was really because I thought in the end I could probably get back to creativity even if I did a science degree, but it'd be probably quite difficult to get back to science if I chose the creativity route. And I guess that not only echoes what I said about just really wanting to enjoy whatever I was doing, but it actually then started to form the very early stages of my career, because the first graduate job I then took was with a company called Smith & Nephew that I'm sure everybody knows. And at that point, they had a consumer products arm. And the reason why I took that job and got it was not only Smith & Nephew being a great business with a very good, credible graduate scheme, but actually I was working on the Lillette's brand of sanitary protection. And at that point, I took that job as a product developer. And you can already see, therefore, the combination of fibres and absorbency, but science very much playing through that. And actually, I always find that interesting that there was a job out there that somehow could combine those random interests, albeit in sanitary protection. And so I guess that was sort of my first foray into a consumer business. And little did I know at that point just how intrigued and curious I would become about the consumer and the psychology of the consumer and how that then drives businesses and brands, which has really sort of continued throughout my career. And that very, very fortunate stumble first, let's say, into FMCG really was just the most fantastic eye-opener. And I've never left FMCG since, knowing how much really over time I've really, really enjoyed, enthused around the learning more and more about the consumer. So from there, then I actually went into to work for Kimberly-Clark and still at this point in product development. And I started working on the Huggies brand. And again, you can see the theme there of absorbency and fibres. But very quickly, actually, I flipped into marketing. And that was my first real sort of opportunity in marketing. And Kimberly-Clark are still a fantastic business, very, very values orientated, fantastic leadership capabilities, but also focus, and this fantastic brand in Huggies. And that was a European role, and really where I cut my teeth, I guess, in marketing at a classical level. So very classically trained, very, very lucky. But that role as well, looking after 4 European markets, and also I think learning how to attack a very, very big leading brand in P&G's Pampers. So we were a very clear number 2 to Pampers in the European markets. And I think that gives you a really, really laser sharp focus on what you have to do and some pace around doing that. And of course, they really are the masters of branding and consumer-led businesses as well.
That must be fun being number 2, though, because it's kind of like you can see them in your sights, a little bit more sort of worrying for them in many ways, because you're sort of like, really snapping at their heels.
Yeah, I think it's really uniting and gives businesses and brands great focus, and more of that in a little while, because actually that got even stronger when I started working on a challenger brand, where really your number one goal is to start exposing and challenging the leaders in the category. And that is fun, as you say, but also hugely uniting, if not slightly exhausting. But I think it really, really does refocus the lens on what you have to do. And yeah, I think it's a great thing to be able to rally around as well as an organisation.
Fantastic.
So from there, I then moved into a smaller business. And I remember thinking at that time, and this is a fairly common theme, I think, around my career as well, that I loved those big businesses. I loved really understanding and learning what FMCG was about, what the consumer was about, what brands were about, how we took those brands to market. But I remember distinctly thinking, these big businesses are so big that actually to move and have impact and drive that performance is quite slow, actually, and really wanting to get to some more medium-sized businesses at that point, or something slightly smaller at the very least. And then I went to work on the Durex brand. By this point, certainly my husband really is saying to me, this is slightly getting embarrassing. Do you think you could work on any brands above the belt and perhaps slightly less embarrassing to talk about? But again, I guess this was classical personal care FMCG. And this was a really interesting role because it was a global role. And my remit really was very much about how do we use all that equity around our core business of condoms and actually start really expanding all that brand strength into the broader sexual wellbeing arena. And of course, what comes with that is growth and innovation and expansion. And that was a fascinating role, but also a fantastic extension of my European roles into global this time, and really far reaching across the world, from China to US to Asia to Europe again, and lots of different business situations across those, but really getting to the bottom of the consumer there and really what is motivating the consumer and trying to form some common global ground around that when you have really very, very distinct and different cultures, levels of acceptance, levels of, in some areas, sexual well-being was a very taboo subject. So really sort of getting under the skin of that and forming a brand opportunity around it was really, really key. And another really, really big thing and really started me forming sort of this much more transformational element to my career was that at that point, this was a very, very sales-driven organisation in high growth. And there was a real remit as well around getting more of that consumer and brand focus and really uniting more of a strategic consumer brand lens around what we were doing. And that was hugely, hugely interesting, but really, really quite challenging because particularly on that topic, you can imagine how people were just sort of, the supply network is so wayward anyway. And I think, to drive sales, there was a lot of sort of bartering around the back that was going on. So that were making the business successful. So it was quite a tough one to start drawing that back to a consumer and brand strategy. Having said that, I think this was one of my favourite places to work. It was an absolute joy, wonderful people to work with. I can still remember the belly laughs, either on the topic or with absolutely fun people working such a diverse culture. And that business was so successful that it was actually acquired by Reckitt Benckiser. And so I did the latter part of my time there with Reckitt Benckiser, which is also a phenomenal experience, very, very different culture, but also a great sort of insight into acquisition and bringing a brand into the fold of a very, very big and successful blue chip FMCG. So really, really interesting time there.
And I can imagine, sorry to sort of jump in, but I'm just trying to sort of think about that time before it was bought, because there was a real use of humor. I mean, that's sort of the time, that you were building that brand, all those challenges that you say about across different countries and different approaches to the products. But I do remember as a brand that there was a lot of humor and brand building at that time. So yeah, that really came across.
Yeah, and I think, getting that humour right was always quite important, really, and also getting that culturally right was really, really quite important as well. And, we did finally move that communications platform on to be able to sort of encompass all of those different things. But as you say, a great topic to be able to drive lots of humour and lots of tongue-in-cheek interpretations of the brand and take it to places and actually really normalise it as well. I think that was a huge job of the brand at the time, particularly where that topic can be quite taboo depending on, which markets you're talking in. So it can cut through that as well if used really, really well. And so from there, I then did actually make the move into food and drink. Finally did get to the other side of FMCG, and I then took a job with Warburton's. And this was a really, really interesting but different challenge to anything else really I'd ever done. And the biggest reason for that was this is a privately owned business. The shareholders actively working in the business every day, phenomenal group of people again, and a very values-led business again. And I think it's fair to say fairly operational and sales-led, but with this huge passion for the brand because of course, the brand is the name of the family. And that brings a really, really different dynamic to the way that you might either brand build or start really driving the consumer slightly more strongly in that environment. And the other really interesting thing there is it's not PLC, of course, so the long-term view is so prevalent. And I think also this real subtlety around the influencing network, how does that work? And, without that, the PLC shareholder to serve every quarter, that really does bring about very different ways of working that you really have to get used to, especially if you're going to try and start influencing those agendas. So really, really great business, phenomenally successful, huge in the UK, but a significant point there that this was a UK only business and a real shift again from European and global then into UK only and really sort of getting under the skin of that P&L and driving the performance purely in that market. So a really great experience, absolutely loved the brand and loved working in that business as well. And from there, then I flipped actually into one of their competitors and I took on a really meaty challenge with Robert's Bakery. And they had got to a point where they really wanted to do something different with their business. They, a lot of the baking industry is quite traditional. And I think, as fourth in the market, you have a real choice about whether you are going to do the same as everybody else or really think differently. And that was really the brief that was given to me, is that we wanted to really treat that brand as a challenger brand and really relaunch it as a challenger brand. And as I said earlier, I think that is almost like you almost unlearn and reteach yourself everything that you've ever learned about marketing working on a challenger brand. So with all that great experience, you have to sort of reprogram yourself and reset yourself again to acutely focus on attack, all the time attack and exposing the leaders in the category. And you have got to really bring creativity to the role every single day in terms of how are you going to think differently, start to be more bold, actually take a lot more risk every day in what you're doing just to cut through and be able to command essentially greater share of voice than anybody else in the category through your actions. And obviously that is the spirit, as we know, of a challenger brand. And I think what was so energizing and uniting around that again was that we were able to develop the business mission around that, unite a workforce around it. And then essentially also, I think what's really interesting about challenger brand is, you can start to use that to drive the way that you operate each day in the office. And, some phenomenal books been written about that, which we really turned to in those times, and a fantastic experience. And I really do think, having run a challenger brand, you apply that again every day, whether you're running leading brands or follower brands, because those principles never leave you. And actually the most valuable thing is then applying those challenger brand principles to a leading brand, because the whole risk of running a leading brand is that you fall into the trap of complacency. And if you've run a challenger brand, you never take that for granted again. And you're always trying to work out ways to prod and get that airtime for yourself. So another fantastic experience.
That's such an interesting thing to have, just kind of like constantly be in challenger mode. That's a real sort of penny drop moment for me as well, actually, because I can imagine that, as you say, complacency is that sort of threat for the big brands. So that's just part of your DNA now.
Exactly. I think it really is. And you have to work quite hard to keep it afterwards, I think, because, but really starting to think differently about what you're doing, the use of PR, the use of how that works with social and digital, budgets are a lot tighter. So you've got to be really creative with what you have. But it is exhausting because, as you rightly acknowledged, every day that's your goal, and you've got to roll your sleeves up and really get stuck in. So it's it's a fantastically grounding experience as well, but I think also one that will never leave me. And from there, then I went back to personal care in FMCG again. So took a role with PZ Cousins, who were on a hugely transformational journey that they were very public about, wanting to start to reinvigorate the business around a consumer and brand-led agenda. And I was looking after the UK brands of Carex, Imperial Leather, and Original Source as well. So that was a phenomenally all-encompassing journey the whole organisation were on, but obviously lots of work for the marketeers to do. And again, I think some really iconic brands in there, as you already mentioned, Tamara. Imperial Leather, how you treat that quite carefully is really, really key. And we did eventually manage to relaunch Imperial Leather back to its Imperial roots after years of I suppose, it kind of being slightly neglected, which is a great, great achievement. And that really leads me then back to where I am today. So I then took a role back in bakery, which is very surprising for myself, but this was an absolute gem of an opportunity. You already introed so well, Tamara, knowing a little bit about our business, but we have this wonderfully stylish, premium French bakery brand in Pierre that has been built and grown phenomenally in the last 5 years to achieve such success that it attracted the attention of Grupo Bimbo, and they acquired the Pierre brand about a year and a quarter ago. And this, to me, provides the backdrop of a really, really interesting future for the brand. Very successful already in 2 markets, the UK and the US, but with Grupo Bimbo's phenomenal operational presence around the world, we have this real opportunity to grow this brand globally to a phenomenal level over the next 5 years. So a really great opportunity. Part of that is driving the integration post-acquisition as well. And again, I look back to my Durex Reckitt days as some of the reference there, but also, of course, a lot of work to be done in really driving that consumer and brand approach again. I think because the business has grown so entrepreneurially through distribution and done such a great job of that, of course, we are now in a really great position to be able to start really driving that consumer agenda harder as well.
I love it. All paths led to here.
Yeah.
It's really interesting, actually, to hear that summary of your whole career, and there really seem to be some clear common threads running through it. You talked about a lot of science and how, you seem to thrive being in those challenger brand positions. And I'd be really interested to go back a little bit and see how much of that you think started when you were a child. So let's start fairly broadly and just talk about what you were like as a child.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny. I guess I was sport obsessed from the beginning and played a lot of sport. And I think that's influenced really by my dad, who was a fantastic sportsman, and just sort of turned my hand to anything and absolutely loved it. Always talkative. That still remains today. I'm sure people would still describe me as talkative, energetic, and actually a little bit rebellious. And I think that's really, really, echoes lots of all of the roles that I've taken. I mean, I do remember pushing the boundaries, but equally, I didn't really cause my parents any real problems either. But I know today that still exists. I do enjoy sort of a challenge. I do enjoy just pushing the envelope a little bit. And also that comes with creativity, I think, that, thinking out of the box differently, solving problems, I think is all very much grounded in that.
Definitely. And when you were little, did you know what you wanted to be when you grew up?
I mean, I really didn't. But again, I think, through talking with you guys, it's quite interesting. And the two things I remember thinking very young were either like to be a fashion designer or an astronaut, neither of which have come true, of course. But again, if you look at both of those, one has a real flavour of creativity in it. I was never a good enough artist to have done that. But the other one is the astronaut is about that exploration, and actually very, very science-based, even though I wasn't thinking like that at the time. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if they were echoes of some of that thread of those things I enjoyed that I talked about right at the beginning.
Maybe. When you were little, did you have particular people that you looked up to, whether they were in the public eye or people that you knew?
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure my parents. My mum ran her own business. She was a fantastic role model. But my dad also not only was a fantastic sportsman, but also supported my mum's career and her ambitions, and then therefore made it perfectly acceptable for two careers to exist in the household. And I think what that led me to probably is it never crossed my mind that I wouldn't have a career. It never crossed my mind that I wouldn't have a stimulating job or go and be able to do what anybody else can do. And I think always as a child, probably your role models do end up being the family. I mean, my siblings, of course, as well. Got two siblings. We're very, very happy and very lucky to be in that situation. But it was always quite keen to know that they approved too, I guess, especially when you're younger. And then, of course, there's the usual pop stars, sports stars. I do remember probably Madonna and Andre Agassi coming into that, half wanting to be a sports star as well.
And how about as you've developed into an adult and you've got your career, have there been particular genuine humans who've influenced you along the way or given you that extra bit of support that you'd like to acknowledge?
Yeah, I think there are three people who really stick out for me, and there is a common thread in them, but they are all really, really different. First was one of my leaders at Kimberly-Clark, a guy called Mark Patterson, who was our departmental head. And, I've already referenced Kimberly-Clark is a very, very high values business, a really, really great business with some very, very good people working in it. But I think what he really showed me was true leadership, even at that very early stage. That was a great role model, actually, for how leaders should and can behave. I think really he was values-led, he set high standards, but he was genuine, he was human, he was principled. And where he didn't really agree, but knew that it would be better to engage us in a different way, he would find a way around perhaps some of those difficult things in organisations that become quite restrictive. And I love not only his creativity, but I think also the way that he managed that without getting himself in trouble. And I thought, what a very smart person and a great example. My second would be a lady called Sue Yell, and I met her at Warburton's, and she is still the HR director at Warburton's, and a phenomenal influence, actually, to me personally and in my career. I think really the reasons for that is she is a very, very smart lady who has had to learn and work within very male-dominated environments through her career. But what I love about Sue and her leadership is that she has never used that as a negative. She has only thought about really what women can bring to the leadership mix. So as a real positive, we might bring different things and we can influence in a really different way with a very different style. And actually we can balance some of those more difficult topics and the way that they're approached through a very different approach. And so actually utilising the strength of the skill set versus sort of being intimidated by that or in any way apologetic was something that I really, really thought was just the most fantastic learning curve. She's very, very influential in women in leadership. And I think, she also set up a fantastic forum in the business for that. She had the most fantastic speakers, and all of those contributed very much to kind of the my own principles around how to lead, but also support others in their development and, in reaching their true potential along their own journeys as well. And the third would be an extremely kind and human gentleman called Andrew Gagan. I met him only fairly recently, really, in the last 3 or 4 years, and has been such a great influence again in my career and my own personal development. He, again, is so human, generous, kind, but super smart. And what I love about him and what he's shown me again is that you can still behave with absolute integrity, even right at the top, and as you wish to. And to me, again, that's a huge value that really, really matters. And I think, again, great example that I will carry forward as I continue on my path.
Thank you. And actually, I'm going to sort of bring us back up to date, although I'm also thinking, just based on what you were saying, that I feel like there needs to be a Pierre NASA tie-up there somewhere. This is how you can bring into two of your worlds together. It can still happen.
Absolutely. Let's send some buns to space.
There you go. So I do want to go back to, you've talked about your transformational roles, and your passion really comes through when you're talking about this. Can you just delve into a little bit more about why you think that really drives you?
Yeah, I think the idea of change and impact has always floated my boat. And I remember, as I said, in my early career thinking, I need to get some small businesses here because you're so lost in this massive juggernaut. And actually, I really wanted to drive more action, and I had a lot more energy I felt to give to driving performance than sometimes I could do in those really, really big businesses really early on anyway. And I think that reflects over all my energy and drive that, can be a great thing. That it also has some downsides, of course. But I think that energy and drive, coupled with my curiosity about the consumer and sort of what makes them tick, I think, and really my huge sort of belief that will drive sustainable business growth in the end, is probably why I've ended up sort of really always exploring those slightly more challenging transformational roles. And I think, to do those, you do have to have some of that thirst of wanting to go and lift up the rocks and find out, because it does take quite a lot of effort and energy, and you do need to be pretty tenacious and determined. And I think I can luckily count within my strengths as well, and relishing that challenge again, although all of those have lots of disadvantages as well.
And obviously, when you're leading through this sort of change, there is a lot about your approach and perhaps supporting future leaders coming through as well. What is your approach to supporting the future leaders in the business?
Yeah, that's really interesting, particularly when you're in transformational circumstances, because often either all of the tools are not in place to support people's development, or also it's pretty frenetic. So sometimes, finding the right amount of brain space and time to really support individuals. Obviously, lots of times in transformational roles, the organisation is disengaged and slightly disgruntled as well. So trying to really not only spot talent, but also provide the right environment for development in the backdrop of that can be actually quite challenging. I think the key things are to be pragmatic, in my view, in those situations, because the one thing that you really, really need on that transformational journey is fantastic people with great talent, but also with great will. And those who really want to go on that journey, you really do need to invest the time to develop and support and keep them engaged in that transformational journey. And I think that point around pragmatism comes when you start to just think, okay, the world isn't perfect, but there are many, many tools now in my toolbox, helped by all of those roles that I've done. Actually, lots of those I still use from years ago. That actually means we can get started. And lots of times I think people need some sort of framework of development. It's really hard to say, what would you like to do? And what do you think you need to do without any information structure or any tools? So even if I'm using tools from 3 different businesses and rehashing them, I think it's good to just get people started, get people focused. And actually, I think there are very many small things that you can be doing for development that don't cost the earth. And I think obviously we all know people do get fixated very much on training and investment in them. But actually there's so much on the job that can be done. There's so much in terms of mentorship and coaching, and also just giving people different opportunities and stretching them into areas that actually, will develop them in the areas that they are interested in as they go. And I think that's the brilliant thing about transformational businesses, is actually those opportunities do exist. It's not a sort of a kind of stowed, boring place where we're gradually growing. It's everything is going on. And if you really, really want to develop, I do believe that is one of the best environments that you could be in, because you're doing everything, you're rolling your sleeves up. And so that's something I'm always looking for is enough will. But actually you can do an awful lot with will for people who want to learn and develop. And I think the last thing is really interesting is inviting people to really lead that development journey themselves, because I think what sometimes comes with a disgruntled and a difficult organisational backdrop that is in the midst of change, which is very, very challenging for individuals and groups of people, is this sense that, almost what's the organisation doing for me? And I think really trying to change that mindset to say, we are here to support whatever it is you'd like to do with your career and how you would like to develop. But the impetus for that must come from the individual, with the support of the organisation, of me, of everybody around, to try to make that happen. And I think that's quite a big mindset shift in the middle of that very difficult situation of change and everything moving in insecurity as well about the future.
Yeah, it's that helping people grow by allowing them to take risks in a safe environment as well, isn't it? And giving them the trust to do that. And yeah, I can really see that.
Yeah.
And I know also one of the themes that's come through is your passion about putting the consumer at the heart of the brand and then building the organisation around that. Is that easier said than done?
It really is absolutely easier said than done. I think so many things go into the mix here about whether that is actually achievable and it can be successful. And I think, so much of change is about understanding the organisation around you. Are they really up for it? No matter what's been actually communicated, how hard should you drive? Do you have the right sponsors? Who might not want to support this change? There are lots of people who will find that uncomfortable or maybe not understand it, or can perceive a power shift they don't like, which I think isn't relevant. But these are human feelings around what happens when change moves. And obviously, if you're trying to drive that change towards a consumer and a brand agenda, then that becomes quite tricky at times within organisations. But I think this all has to be balanced with driving some progress. If that's the brief you've been given, then as much as you're trying to observe those sensitivities in an organisation and piece together all of that mix, you also got to drive some progress. And I think there's a constant calibration of that going on in terms of how hard to push and how to manage that pace to drive the change, versus at the same time being sensitive to the organisation, how fast it wants to move, but actually, perhaps more importantly, whether the organisation is truly up for it. And I think that's really, really interesting, because it's very clear everybody understands that's the right thing to do. But actually, what that requires, I think, sometimes is underestimated. The scale of change in an organisation is so huge to drive that focus. And I think, that starts with, do people even understand what we're trying to do, how we need to try and do that, but actually everything that goes with that as well. And a huge point around that is investment. If you really want to drive that, you'll need to invest in that front end so heavily. And I think what really becomes the telling point is when those big challenging decisions come up around either investment or around really making the decisions that do kind of put the consumer brand right at the forefront. And when those don't happen, I think that becomes quite an interesting point. Again, you have to listen to think, right, okay, we're not there yet. And again, that constant calibration again has to continue to go on. So I do think it's totally possible. I've definitely been in organisations where it's absolutely possible, but I think, you do need that sort of complete alignment, and staying strong when the time gets tough to the agenda is really, really key as well.
Definitely. And back to you, what's exciting you personally, either in your role or generally in the industry?
Well, I mean, in my role, I think the sky is the limit with the brand I have. I'm so very, very lucky. I have a premium brand, as I mentioned, in a very difficult FMCG environment. And, that is really, truly a gift, as well as a brand that is in such high demand from the consumer. And those things are such a phenomenal platform, if you like, to build from. So that is so exciting. Also, the possibilities of the brand and the St. Pierre brand and where we can take that, I think is just hugely, hugely exciting as well. So that from the here and now. I think from an industry perspective, the role of AI and its endless possibilities, particularly creatively, is so exciting. And I think particularly for me in the area of efficiency and effectiveness, because the possibilities of how AI will play a role in creative, to me, is just a huge fast forward in terms of how we can drive, a lot of those brilliant returns, but in a much speedier, more efficient way. And of course, what goes with that is a lot of unknown.
Yeah.
And I can really see, I definitely, I'm only scratching sort of at the surface of what AI can offer in my experience and knowledge so far in that territory. And I think, some people can find that a little bit disconcerting. For me, that's positive. I think and it goes probably back to lots of things I've told you about myself today. I'm intrigued and curious to know about what this can bring us, but on the whole, think we need to embrace it with a really positive mindset, because the possibilities, I do think, will be endless.
I wouldn't expect anything less from you as a disruptor.
So we're going to move on to the final section of the podcast now, where we get a bit more personal and move away a little from the world of work. So let's start with, what's your idea of a perfect weekend?
Yeah, I mean, a perfect weekend for me, it's pretty easy, really. It's somewhere hot, easy to reach, quick couple of hours, bit of culture, very good food, lovely drinks, and yeah, I'm in heaven. That's pretty much it. If we have to do that in the winter, if you put a restriction on, it would probably be, somewhere like the Lake District, love the outdoors, and then love getting into a cosy pub at the end of all of that. Either of those float my boat. Very, very happy with either of those options at the weekend.
Sounds fantastic, and there's no restrictions whatsoever. And on the theme of no restrictions, and coming back to your love of science, maybe, if you could time travel to any period with no consequence, where and when would you go?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple that spring to mind. The Second World War definitely springs to mind, which sounds a bit morbid, but I think it was also a huge time of united front. I think, the camaraderie would be something I'd just love to have experienced. But probably in the end, I settled on the Tudor times. I only want to go there for a week, just to be clear.
Yeah.
I really don't want to live in those times. Oh my goodness, the grottiness and the brutality just is not something I'd particularly want to experience. But I do find those times exceptionally fascinating in really the influence of a lot of, what we experience today. And very much just would have liked to have just seen a little snapshot of that.
See what it was really like.
Definitely.
And what's the last thing you did that gave you childlike joy?
Yeah, I mean, this is fairly easy for me. It's I think it's pretty much singing and dancing to anything. But I think the number one song, if I want to go there, is probably Whitney Houston's Higher Love with Kygo. Something in that song does something to my brain. And if I just get that on really loud, I could dance around the kitchen and just lose myself in that for a good 5 minutes.
Fantastic. So basically you're saying kitchen disco brings you childlike
Absolutely.
joy.
Exactly.
One of my favourite questions, and Wendy and I are always kind of arguing we're negotiating over who's going to ask this one, but how would you fare in a zombie apocalypse?
Oh, yes. Now, I mean, this one, I I think I just wouldn't, is my answer. I just need humans. I need the variety and spontaneity of human beings. And that doesn't sound like a place I could get that. So I think I might just quietly sort of slink off into the dark shadows and let everybody else get on with it.
I don't know. I argue that you would rebrand the apocalypse and completely disrupt the whole environment instead.
Possibly.
How would your friends describe you?
I mean, definitely loud, fun, kind, though I think up for it, and pretty much always ready to party with a bit of persuasion.
I love that. And actually, on the sort of the party and the food, but what's your favourite restaurant or food experience?
Yeah, this one is so hard because there are just so many great places, aren't there? And so many different kind of cuisines to choose from. But I think probably, I've gone for Tom Kerridge's Hand and Flowers. We went there for a real treat a weekend once. And I think what I love about that is it's so down to earth. And it's just proper food, but such beautiful food. And so it kind of combines for me everything I love about food, and that it's high quality. It's so perfectly prepared, and it's very, very, it's absolutely delicious, but it is pretty grounded. It's still a pub, and that probably is my ideal idea of where to spend some time.
Oh, that sounds lovely. Now, I think I'm going to guess the answer to this one, because you've sort of spoken about your love of sort of dancing around the kitchen and singing, but do you like karaoke as well? And if so, what is your go-to song?
Yeah, I'll always be persuaded, worryingly. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily go and do that as a book it in for every Saturday night, but absolutely as part of the party vibe, I'll be there right at the front. I think this one has to be dictated by what I can actually sing. And the only thing I can truly sing without not murdering is Carly Simon's You're So Vain. And that's really because it's a slightly lower, basically I can manage it with my slightly lower voice, which is really bad at the moment because I've had this awful cough and cold. But yeah, anything too high, I just can't manage. So I just have to opt for anything that's within my range. And that seems to be it.
Or duets. You see, there's always a way.
Let somebody else take the lead and just do the high.
This is what I do with Wendy, you see. So Wendy is the soprano, I do the lower ones.
Excellent.
Fantastic. Megan, it's been such a joy to have you on the podcast. I've been wanting to have you as a guest for such a long time. Is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to talk about, or any closing thoughts from you?
No, I don't think anything from me that we didn't cover has been pretty extensive, but mainly for me, just thank you so much for having me. It's been a really interesting journey for me back through my life, actually. So a really enjoyable hour, and thank you very much for having me.
You've been listening to Genuine Humans, brought to you by The Social Element. If you loved what you heard, remember to subscribe, or you can find out more at www.thesocialelement.agency.